Well, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone here in the loft and everyone in the Zoom room, everyone in Facebook Live land, and everyone watching the YouTube video. Welcome to another in the series of Empathy with Nature, Thinking Like a Plant, which is nothing short of phenomenal. And that is because we're learning to do phenomenological approach to nature, a new way of sciencing, something to complement our left brain, ego based Newtonian approach to science and nature, which is causing a Cartesian split and subsequent suffering from Cartesian anxiety, using an approach inspired by the scientific methodology of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, which includes more imaginative right brain activity, as well as invites more participation of our subjective side, albeit a refined and trained subjective side, so we don't fall into false illusions about things, but rather develop genuine vision, which will empower us to have a more accurate knowing of the true nature of nature, using what my mentor Craig Holdridge calls in his book Thinking Like a Plant, living thinking, as opposed to dead thinking, composed of corpses of thoughts, thoughts that are done, finished, and already decaying. Because as Goethe says, if we want to behold nature in a living way, we must follow her example and make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself. And if we do, then our experience of nature will be, in a word, phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Everybody say phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Now can you say phenomenological?
Phenomenological.
This phenomenological approach requires some doing on our part, some will activity as well as thinking, but also some intensity of feeling, which means this work will not only engage us, but will change us, which is what the world wants, what the world is waiting for. Not just more new and interesting scientific discoveries, which are fine, but a new kind of sciencing, and therefore a new kind of scientist, which, as you may be seeing, something that engages the imagination and sentiment of our inner artist, a more balanced approach for a more balanced world. And such was Goethe, with not only a keen scientific eye, which allowed him to see things others didn't see, including the discovery of the premaxillary bone. That's right, he discovered the premaxillary bone, a pair of cranial bones in the front of the upper jaw, which up to that point scientists thought only existed in animals. But Goethe discovered this and is accredited for that. So along with his strong scientific eye, he also possessed a strong artistic eye as a poet, playwright, a great literary figure, making him Germany's version of Shakespeare. So I hope everyone has made some time to do the practice introduced in the last session, looking at leaves. And remember that all these practices can be found on the Power for Conscious Living website, because these are not meant to be just one-off practices, but something you can do whenever you are out in nature to enhance your experience of nature and make meditations on nature part of your personal development. And to support you in that, I hope you've got some pencil crayons and even obtained a nice art tablet of paper to draw in. You're just familiarizing yourself with these practices, but they are something you can work with for the rest of your life. It's wonderful to go out in nature, but it can even be more nourishing to sit and draw what you see, to develop both your scientific eye and your artistic eye, your objective and your subjective sides, both at the same time, both in balance. And remember, this is not about being an artist and doing Robert Bateman style pieces. It's about fostering our truly human capacities and organicness in a world that is becoming increasingly mechanical and technological. We're learning to think like a plant, but as we will see in the session, in our doing, we are also engaging some of the intelligence of the heart, becoming heartists, which is actually an important evolutionary step to bring balance back to our off-balance world and stay connected to the livingness of nature. So just to warm ourselves up with a little bit of heartness as a heartist, to do something we did last week, which was to invent your own kind of leaf. It's actually an infinite number of varieties, styles, shapes of leaves in this realm of infinite possibilities. So yeah, take some time right now to focus with your pencil, crayon, and paper a new kind of leaf. You might call it, as my mother did when I was a bad boy, you're turning over a new leaf. Because there's someone else I'd like to briefly mention who embodies this spirit, another mentor of mine, who I was honored to spend 7 years of my life with, shadowing and writing about. This is R. Murray Schafer, a great luminary, author, teacher, an activist who started the World Forum on Acoustic Ecology back in the 1970s and first coined the term soundscape. On top of all that, he's considered Canada's preeminent composer with well over 100 major compositions, as well as a symphonic cycle that rivals Wagner's Ring Cycle. I was so taken by his accomplishments, I wrote his biography, which came out in 2013, called R. Murray Schafer and the Plot to Save the Planet, a biographical adventure. I'll pass this around. You can have a look at his picture. I first learned of Murray Schafer in 2007 because he is famous for doing music theater out in nature. I eventually became involved in some of his works, one where the audience has to arrive at a wilderness lake at 3 o'clock in the morning because Murray wanted to use the actual sunrise as a prop in his play. All the musicians were placed around the lake in the dark, and the singers were in boats on the lake, singing along with the actual dawn birds who were waking up at that hour. This is just one of the many pieces he wrote that were designed to be performed outside in partnership with nature's elements. Murray felt that music is ultimately sourced from nature, and so we should be giving it back to nature to complete the circuit by doing it outside in nature. He was truly a revolutionary who actually just passed away a few weeks ago. Something else about Murray as a composer is that he never turned to the computer to compose his works, as most composers do these days. He continued to be old school, doing them by hand. And in his compositions, he added drawings and illustrations to his notation, not just as decoration, but actually as additional instructions and inspirations to the musicians playing the pieces. Does the score very non-linear way with the lines going in different directions to indicate a sense of movement and different images there to elaborate on the theme of the piece. There you go. Yeah, a few years ago, his hand-drawn compositions toured the country, and I think some of them are still in a museum in Ottawa. Even though music composition has a strong math and sciencey component, Murray kept the artistry strong and was in fact directly in partnership with nature to do this. You might be able to find some of his music on YouTube. I believe there's one, tributes to snow and other elements of nature. One other thing about R. Murray Schafer, not only was he a real Renaissance man, he was also a true autodidact, which means he was self-taught. This began when he was expelled from the University of Toronto for speaking his mind just a little too much. Ironically, 50 years later, they brought him back to convocation to give him an honorary doctorate for a lifetime of achievements. He was also awarded the Order of Canada. I too became an autodidact when I realized what I was looking for wasn't at the university I was attending, and decided to self-educate outside the ivy-covered walls. And this is really what this program is about. It is a path of self-education. Education comes from the Latin meaning to lead out, to lead out. And we are working directly with nature here to be led out from our egocentric materialism to a wider reality with the help of our plant companions, some of which I've got here in the starting lineup for tonight's practice. Our plant companions. So, for a little artistic treat this evening, I thought I would like to start off this session with some poetry from Goethe, so we can be inspired by his artistic side as well as his scientific insights. I have a copy of Goethe's writing, his book, The Metamorphosis of Plants. The Metamorphosis of Plants. It's a beautiful edition, ironically published by MIT, no less, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious technological academic institutions on the planet. And inside it's got a nice portrait of Goethe, probably picturing him closer to the end of his life, which was at age 83. And this edition includes his poem, The Metamorphosis of Plants, which is the same title as his scientific work. I think that's kind of neat how his artistic work and his scientific work bear the same title. It's also got a picture of the archetypal plant, which we'll talk a bit more about this evening. All right, Goethe's poem, The Metamorphosis of Plants, which is written as a love poem to his beloved. The rich profusion thee confounds, my love, of flowers spread athwart the garden. Name upon name assails thy ears, and each more barbarous sounding than the one before. Like unto each the form, yet none alike. And so the choir hints a secret law, a sacred mystery. Ah, love, could I vouchsafe in sweet felicity a simple answer? Gaze on them as they grow. See how the plant burgeons by stages into flower and fruit. Burst from the seed so soon as fertile earth sends it to life from her sweet bosom, and commends the unfolding of the delicate leaf to the sacred goad of ever-moving light. Asleep within the seed the power lies, foreshadowed pattern, folded in the shell, root, leaf, and germ, pale and half-formed, the nub of tranquil life, kept safe and dry. Swells upward, trusting to the gentle dew, soaring apace from out the enfolding night. Artless the shape that first burst into light, the plant child, like unto the humankind, sends forth its rising shoot that gathers limb to limb, itself repeating, recreating. In infinite variety, 'tis plain to see, each leaf elaborates the last. Serrated margins, scalloped fingers, spikes that rested, webbed within the nether organ, at length attaining preordained fulfillment. Oft the beholder marvels at the wealth of shape and structure shown in the succulent surface, the infinite freedom of the growing leaf. So we'll stop there, about halfway through, leaving it a bit on a cliffhanger. He's got to the leaf stage of the metamorphosis of the plant. So we'll see where it goes in the second half. And so this is actually halfway, just past the halfway point of this series, Thinking Like a Plant, being session 5. And in a sense, we have crossed a threshold in more than one way. Last session, we began joining non-physical geometrical ideas with what is taking place in the realm of nature, to bridge between the mechanical and the organical aspects of nature, to connect the patterned forces of nature with the idea that there is actually a living intelligence of nature, that nature is alive and not just programs running. We referred to the pyramids, these human-made edifices, and the great Giza pyramid that involved incredible mathematical accuracy and scientific precision. What were these people trying to achieve back then? They actually employed the power of nature, the power of the Nile River that ran right next to it at that time, to drive some of the geometry built into the pyramid, some of the mechanical plant, you could say, of the pyramid, so that it could become something of a living building, or at least something of a singing building, because the composition of the building could hold certain vibrations and a level of consciousness within it. This is because, and to pull up another great quote from Goethe, architecture is frozen music. Architecture is frozen music. Also, we have been approaching this threshold of balance in the first half, this threshold of balance, which brought us to the idea of an archetypal plant, or Erbpflanz, as Goethe called it in German, and really calls into question what the nature and power of an idea is, the idea of an archetypal plant. Does all of nature stem from an idea, a living, evolving idea that ultimately manifests in physical form? A case in point is the work of Buckminster Fuller, who is best associated with the idea of the geodesic dome. Bucky, as they called him, wasn't actually the first person to design the geodesic dome, but he came up with the term geodesic and popularized the idea. And in a book I have about him, I found an interesting quote that relates well to our theme, where he says, "I was looking for the coordinate system of nature. I was looking for the coordinate system of nature, and I was confident that I had found that system. I will be remembered for the fact that I found nature's coordinate system, and it will be possible to make models of it. The most important thing is that for centuries, scientists have been saying that nature is not using models because there is a fourth dimension, energy, and you can't make a model of the fourth dimension. It is so abstract as to be immodelable. So similarly, with Goethe's archetypal plant, we are considering a model that the plant world bases itself on. And even though Goethe said it will be possible to go on forever inventing plants, he really considered that there's really only one plant in the world, the archetypal plant. He also said we can know that there is a logical existence to all plants. This logic and order flowed from the Urpflanz, the archetype behind all plants and plantness. And this is what we are doing here with the practices, to look beyond the physical plant to see what exists behind it. Science can see with a microscope how things come together as a collusion of atoms and molecules. But science doesn't know why things come together as they do. So we're going beyond the atoms and molecules with a different way of seeing, a different way of sciencing, to explore the models of nature, the blueprints, geometry, and archetypes used in nature's architectural work with atoms and molecules. And in acquiring this different way of seeing, we have to recover something that is lost. The lost knowledge of the imagination, which I showed last time. This is a book I devoured this summer. The lost knowledge has led to a lost knowledge of nature, something our ancestors had and current shamanic people have. So this knowledge has become something of a hidden secret, now needing to almost be taught as esoteric or occult knowledge, meaning hidden or secret knowledge, and is leading to the rise of books like Peter Walbin's The Hidden Life of Trees, which I also read this summer, and The Secret Teachings of Plants by Stephen Buhner. Why do we have books like The Hidden Life of Trees and The Secret Life of Plants coming out? Because of the lost knowledge of the imagination and the access to this kind of information, knowledge, and perception. But for Goethe, none of this was hidden, and he referred to nature's open secret. Nature's open secret. The secrets are open to any who have eyes to see and ears to hear. And this is what we are working to develop here in a safe and sound way, which will guard against the possibilities of delusions of fantasy versus genuine spiritual vision. I can honestly say, as someone who was raised with a creative imagination, which was at times somewhat overpowering, especially as a teenager when I was consuming copious amounts of cannabis, I actually needed to develop more the powers of my left brain, which I did in learning how to program computers. That actually helped me bring things into a better balance and brought me to a place of doing this work today in a new and balanced way. A lot of people are seeking to restore this all-important balance, to restore lost parts of their own being, sometimes through partnership with nature, sometimes through the support of plant spirit medicine. And I forgot to mention in the last session when I was discussing my own season of experimentation with ayahuasca, what the end result was. This. The last night I drank ayahuasca, I was brought to the point where I knew I had surrendered enough, I had purged enough, I had seen enough, that I knew what I wanted to do next, which is this. Yeah. I wanted to return to my earlier roots, which I knew were rooted in a love and hunger for spiritual science. But no longer a book approach, as I had been doing, reading and talking about it, but now doing it. And that the doing would bring further metamorphosis to my own being where ayahuasca left off. And again, we can add to Descartes' famous words, as we did in the third session. I think, therefore I am, could be metamorphed into I engage my cognitive capacities with will, so they will grow and evolve into new forms and upgrade my beingness. In other words, I am not only sciencing, I am spiritual sciencing, living science, as Craig Holdridge might say. This choice of a new direction for myself was also reinforced in the research writing of Dr. Rick Strassman, who wrote the book DMT, Spirit Molecule. DMT, the spirit molecule. DMT is the psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca. And he received approval to do experiments with clients over a period of a couple of years, recording the dramatic inner experiences they had, which you can read about in the book. The interesting point for me was that when he interviewed the clients 2 years later, the vast majority of them were still stuck with the same problems they had before going through the program. Somehow the will had not been engaged. And that confirmed for me that the will still needs to be engaged even after the fireworks and light show is over with these psychoactive substances. I've also learned that our inner life requires that sometimes we follow a path of surrender, but at other times a path of will. And life goes best when we balance the path of will and the path of surrender. Working with things like ayahuasca tends to be more a path of surrender, but I'm thankful how it brought me to the place of balancing the path of surrender with engaging the will in a new way, which is this, what we're doing here. And so in the spirit of both surrendering and engaging our will, in accord with the gospel according to nature, we can see how important the relationship is between the plant world and humans. It is meant to be a synergistic relationship, an interactive one. The plant world performs a service to us, and to some degree we serve them. The plant world gives us so much in terms of the food we eat, the air we breathe, clothing, shelter, even the liquids we receive to drink. There is obviously a symbiotic relationship happening between plant and human. Humans inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. We inhale life-giving oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, which is poisonous to other humans. Think of it. Every time we breathe out air, or even open our mouth to speak, we are potentially poisoning each other. So how is it we are still able to breathe and survive? It's because our plant companions take in the carbon dioxide-filled air, building themselves with the carbon, transforming it, and return it back as oxygen for humans to use again. It's a beautiful reciprocal relationship this breathing back and forth between humans and the plant world. The whole cycle is quite amazing when you look at it in totality. Humans breathe in oxygen, then breathe out carbon dioxide. The plant uses the carbon to build its body. Then we eat the plant to get carbon for our body, then excrete out waste, which technically could be used by the plant as well to build its body. So we are really serving each other on the mineral, liquid, and gas levels. However, each in their own only accomplishes half the cycle, but in doing so, we complete the other half for the other. Part of the problem is that we don't really acknowledge the plant world as part of our society, as part of our social coming and going. This is actually a thing known as plant blindness, where people have an inability to see or notice plants in their environment. They just appear as background foliage or decoration, or even just expendable objects or objects to exploit. But as we are seeing, these non-human partners on the planet are anything but expendable. We are like two pieces of a puzzle that fit together inextricably, but in an inverted way. An inverted way. And this inversion of things is actually due to the fact that a human is partly plant. We're partly plant, but an inverted plant. To understand this idea of being an inverted plant, which actually comes from Rudolf Steiner, let's have a closer look at the Erbpflanze, the archetypal plant. A plant is a time being, subject to time. It lives, it grows, it reproduces, and dies. So as a time being, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A plant is also a spatial being. It has a top, a bottom, and a middle. And so do we. We have a bottom, a middle, and a head. So we are plant-like in that we have a beginning, a middle, and an end, both in terms of time and space. And through this, we can see how there is a threefoldness to both a human and a plant. A human has a head part, which houses the brain and is the headquarters of the sense nervous system. We have a heart and lung in the middle, which is the center of the circulatory and respiratory system. And at the lower pole is the metabolic reproductive limb system. There's a threefoldness. And in this threefoldness, we have what is associated with our thinking, feeling, and willing realms. But a human is actually an inverted plant. If you consider that a plant starts from a seed, which is planted in the earth and grows out of that seed, or grows out of a root ball connected to the earth, this is very head-like or brain-like and similar to our nervous system. We are most connected to the earth through our senses in the head. And this part is also primarily connected to the past in terms of its time orientation. At our lower pole, we have the metabolic and reproductive organs, but these appear at the top of the archetypal plant with the pistil, stamen, and stigma. And we refer to our arms and legs as limbs, and it is through these that we do things, where we bear fruit in our doing, fruit that carries the seed of the next generation, the next thing we generate. So this pole is more directed towards the future in terms of time orientation. And in the middle, we have what we call our trunk, same as a plant. And in the trunk is the circulatory and respiratory systems, our heart and our lungs. which is most connected to the present moment. This would correspond to a plant's trunk, which circulates the fluids, and the leaves, that does the gas exchange. The obvious difference is that our lung leaves are on the inside of our stalk instead of on the outside like a plant. So humans have a plant nature, except it's inverted. We are inverted plants in our plant nature. And having the leaf at the heart of the plant is some of why, as I mentioned in the previous session, Goethe saw the leaf as representative of the entire archetypal plant. The leaf stands in the middle and mediates between the root system below and the reproductive system above, between the nourishment being ingested from the decomposing matter of the past and the seed-bearing fruit for the future. But this leaf is at the center, the heart of the archetypal plant, mediating in the middle. Similarly, our heart does the same thing in the center of our humanness. Of course, there are many variations of the archetype in the actual plant world, in this realm of infinite possibilities. Nature makes rules, nature breaks rules. But this threefoldness is a consistent part of the makeup of every plant. It couldn't survive without this composition. And I really liked how last session Naomi invented a new leaf by drawing around her hand. The hand is technically part of the limb system, along with our legs and feet, but the arm and hand are a limb extension of our heart and lung system, coming out from up here. So we can see why there is an association between the hand and the leaf. Beautiful. With all this close association between human and plant, it's no wonder we consume and eat each other. We eat plants every day to live. And one day plants will consume us with the death of our physical matter. But we should also make reference to how the different plants we consume affect our consciousness in different ways. And I'm not just talking about psychoactive plants. This piece also comes from Rudolf Steiner, where he says that in our threefoldness, because our brain corresponds to the root system of a plant, we best serve our brain function by eating root vegetables, things that grow in the ground. Beets, carrots, radishes are good examples. Not potatoes, though. Potatoes grow in the ground, but technically are not root vegetables. They're tubers, so they are less beneficial and, in fact, can be harmful, according to Rudolf Steiner. But eating true roots is beneficial because they are rich in salts from the earth, which stimulate the brain and ultimately our capacity to think. Foods that nourish the other end, our metabolic reproductive region, are things that, guess what, grow higher up in the plant, like the fruits, the seeds, and blossoms. From them we get oils, which are beneficial for the abdomen. Beans also grow high up in the plant and can be good for us, but can also get us a little too high. Being high up and gaseous in nature, as seen with the coffee bean. So eating beetroot grounds our thinking, whereas drinking caffeine gets our cognitive activity more up in the air. And for the middle region, the circulatory and respiratory systems, guess what? Eating the leaf of the plant because the leaf, again, corresponds to the lung of the human. So drinking tea leaves would be stimulating, but in a different way than coffee beans. This is indeed appropriate information for a series called Thinking Like a Plant, to see how internalizing certain parts of a plant quite literally affects our thinking. And not only our thinking, but also our feelings and will. They have the power to affect our whole being. But of course, this requires a certain amount of doing, of will activity on our part in order to gain the full potential. We can't just surrender consciousness to the power of a plant without it eventually affecting our other pole, the will pole. But to do this, we want to introduce what Goethe called active seeing. Active seeing, which is the same as Owen Barfield's participation consciousness. Participation consciousness. Participation consciousness is what is going to allow us to practice phenomenology, working with the imaginative method and honing our objective subjectivity. And to re-emphasize a certain point, the use of our imagination is more than chimerical, which is to say it's more than producing fantasies. When one gets into advanced practices, one starts to see that the imagination and indeed cognition itself, which includes our emotional intelligence, when transformed and applied in specific ways, becomes the portal to an expanded reality. It becomes the portal to an expanded reality. If we continue on the path we're going, underutilizing our full being, keeping our subjective side out of the equation of sciencing in hopes of coming to understand an objective reality, we may continue to circle around the periphery and never actually have an experience of reality. That would be a sad ending to a story. Never actually have a full experience of full reality. I use the analogy of the dog running around the fenced-in yard looking for the ball. The ball's not in the yard. It's outside of the fence. And so the dog will never find what it's looking for in the backyard. And likewise, we will never come to what we're looking for unless we start looking beyond the fence of the analytical mind. This is where developing the new organs opens things up and gives us greater access to the ball outside of the backyard. So in getting into the phenomenological practice, Goethe's active seeing and Owen Barfield's participation consciousness, the nature play assignment we will do now and for the week ahead is along the lines of pattern recognition. You could call it pattern recognition, which is a scientific term where you recognize patterns. Or in this case, the patterns in the threefoldness of the archetypal plant, which has a bottom, a middle, and a top, which corresponds to our brain, heart and lung, and metabolic reproductive limb systems. So you're going to be actively looking for the threefoldness in plants. All sorts of plants. And there's all sorts of plants out there. We'll do it with some plants here. And you can use plants in your home or ones outside, or even look up pictures and drawings and paintings of plants online. That'll work. You might find an artist's website or a science website, which would be great because we're wanting to awaken both our inner artist and inner scientist. And you can find both artists and scientists that would have examples of plants on their websites. When it comes to the root system, unless it's a drawing of one online, usually you don't see the root system. However, this will require activation of your imagination. Yay! Using your imagination by mentally picturing a root system. You've seen root systems before, so you are capable of mental picturing an archetypal root system to complete the picture of the threefoldness of the plant. With some plants, it'll be harder to see how threefoldness plays out. But part of the purpose of participation consciousness is to engage you fully in your thinking, feeling, and willing components. That's kind of the subtext of this practice, is to engage you more fully in your thinking, feeling, and will components, so you can detect those aspects in the plant. You may detect each component, the head, the heart, the will, in its own independent part of the plant, or the component may spread throughout the entire plant. Just the same way the brain is in the head, but the nervous system runs throughout the entire body. And the circulatory system has its center in the heart, but can be seen throughout the entire body. Same with the metabolic limb system. So in your active seeing participation consciousness, see if the thinking, feeling, and willing resides primarily in one part of a plant, or if any of these capacities run throughout the entire plant. This is going to require your imagination. So before we step into the practice, I'm going to actually do a share screen. Here's a diagram that Goethe made for his book, Metamorphosis of Plants. People there on Zoom can see it. Others can gather around the other laptop. And he did it in a way where he separated all the parts out so you could see them more clearly. So at the bottom we have, of course, what? The roots there. And then above that is the cotyledon. The cotyledon is what emerges out of the seed. It can be a single monocotyledon or a double dicotyledon with two leaves. You've all seen that when a seed first opens up and has one or two little leaves that begins the process of being able to absorb sunlight, to engage with the metabolism of sunlight. Then we have the stalk with the first set of leaves. You can see how there's differences in the leaves going up the stalk. More stem. And then we come to the calyx. It's kind of this holding of what comes after it. Calyx is the bottom of the corolla or the bloom. And then above that is the bloom. Here, calyx below, bloom or corolla above. And then above that is the stamens and pistil, the sexual organs of the plant. The pistil. The pistil. It's good. So here we have a plant that's an upside down human. Just as humans are upside down plants. This plant has its brain, its head, its nervous system down here in the earth and connected to the past. It's connected to things that have died and decayed, the matter in the earth. So it's drawing from the past through the brain, the nervous system, the senses, you could say. The human senses are turned to the earth. And then the Cotyledon. So at the top, we have the metabolic reproductive organs. And you could say the limb of the plant. If it was a tree, we would see lots of limbs. And in the middle is the leaves or the lungs. So this is Goethe's drawing of the archetypal parts of the archetypal plant. So this gives you a template to work off of in looking at any and all different kinds of plants in the infinite variety there is out there. All right, so moving into the practice itself. What we're going to do is contemplate a variety of plants using fully our thinking, our feeling, and will capacities to activate participation consciousness with the plant and connect to the threefold thinking, feeling, and willing parts of the plant: the head, the heart, and the will. And to meet parts of yourself in this inverted way. Again, we're going to use exact sensorial observation, then exact sensorial imagination. So we want to look, see, we want to use as much of our senses as possible, and then close off our senses, close off our eyes, and use exact sensorial imagination to visualize, reimagine what we saw, and in that, see if there's any additional information that presents itself within our observation. And make sure that you're visualizing the root system, which you may not see physically, but to make it visible, to make it seen and known within the imagination. And then to draw what you saw. Draw what you saw. Add notes if necessary, if writing helps you to articulate your thoughts, feelings, and will. Then draw what you saw. Because this is to awaken both our inner artist and inner scientist. So for people there in the Zoom room, you may have plants there in your home room. So you have to imagine what the root system would look like. The top, the middle, and the bottom. Of course, it doesn't end at the soil. There's something about this being that needs to be made conscious through our own interactivity. We see the top part that will bear fruit and seed. That's oriented to the future. And there's a part beneath the surface that's connected to the past. It's actually connected to stuff that's decaying. So it's a path of will and surrender. We need to put some will into engaging with active seeing and participatory consciousness, but then also surrender to the impression. Again, going to have to make conscious something that's hidden. The hidden life of this plant beneath the surface of the soil. And up on top, it's not hidden at all. It's very out there and exposed. It's reaching towards the future. In a way, these plants are doing tantra, very tantric in their transformation of reproductive energy. They are sexual beings. Social sexual beings. So you could close your eyes and re-image that. Just really giving you a sample of how to do this on your own. This one's quite different again. See its will activity above the surface. You could say with this aloe plant, the will and the heart circulatory system are really closely combined. This is quite different than the archetypal plant drawing of Goethe. But it's still emanating from the archetype, still contains the threefoldness. Of thinking, feeling, willing. It's interesting how the will and the feeling realm that we see together, it's got kind of this element of chaos. And yet, each one of these leaves is finally formed the same way, very similar. I mean, in a way they're identical. It's not like other plants where lower leaves are one shape and then leaves higher up are a different shape and then even higher a different shape. All of these leaves really seem like facsimiles of each other. Facsimile. So again, you would close your eyes and imagine that plant, visualize it, see what happens in your participation consciousness that reveals the secret teachings of plants and the hidden life of trees. I want to read the second half of Goethe's poem, The Metamorphosis of Plants, speaking to his beloved. And he started out with great disdain for the side of science that wants to name everything, that it really clouds the vision of things. He says, name upon name assails thy ears, each more barbarous sounding than the one before. Not that naming plants and parts of plants is so bad, but he was really trying to emphasize something about a different way, which he proceeded to do in speaking to his love, his beloved, of the different stages of metamorphosis that a plant goes through. And so do we. So he got us to the leaf stage. Where he said, at length attaining preordained fulfillment, Oft the beholder marvels at the wealth of shape and structure shown in succulent surface, the infinite freedom of the growing leaf. Yet nature bids a halt, her mighty hands gently directing even higher perfection. Narrow the vessels, moderate the sap, and soon the form exhibits subtle change. The spreading fringes quietly withdrawn, letting the leafless stalk rise up alone. More delicate the stem that carries now a wondrous growth. Enchanted is the eye, in careful number or in wild profusion. Lesser leaf brethren circle here the core. The crowded guardian chalice clasps the stem, soon to release the blazing topmost crown. So nature glories in her highest growth, showing her endless forms in orderly array. None but must marvel as the blossom stirs above the slender framework of its leaves. Yet is this splendor but the heralding of a new creation, as the many-hued petals now feel God's hand and swiftly shrink? Twin forms spring forth, most delicate, destined for a union. In intimacy they stand, the tender pairs, displayed about the consecrated altar, with Hymen hovers above. A swooning scent pervades the air, its savor carrying life. Deep in the bosom of the swelling fruit, a germ begins to burgeon here and there. As nature wields her ring of ageless power, joining another cycle to the last, flinging the chain unto the end of time, the whole reflected in each separate part. Turn now thine eyes again, love, to the teeming profusion. See its bafflement dispelled. Each plant thee heralds now the iron laws. In rising voices hear the flowers declaim, and once deciphered the eternal law opens to thee, no matter what the guise, slow caterpillar or quick butterfly. Let man himself the ordained image alter. Ah, think thou also how from sweet acquaintance the power of friendship grew within our hearts, to ripen at long last to fruitful love. Think how our tender sentiments, unfolding, took now this form, now that, in swift succession. Rejoice the light of day, love sanctified, strives for the highest fruit, to look at life in the same light that lovers may together in harmony seek out of the higher world. I really enjoyed that. Don't read enough poetry, but that really fit with the sciencing we're doing here. Goethe's Metamorphosis of Plants. You too can pick up a copy of that. So, now the nature play assignment. I'll repeat it once more. First of all, contemplate a variety of plants using fully your thinking, feeling, and will capacities to activate participation consciousness and connect to the threefold thinking, feeling, and willing parts of a plant. Meet parts of yourself in an inverted way. Use exact sensorial observation, then exact sensorial imagination to picture the plant inwardly, especially the root system if not visible. Draw what you saw, add notes if necessary. Part 2. Continue with practices from previous sessions. Don't let those drop off. Just means that you might have to go out for 4 or 5 hours to do them all. But why not? Make it part of your personal path of development and daily meditation. And then thirdly, and the last one is, of course, the Rakshao. Take a few minutes each day to review the events of the day in reverse order. View yourself from an objective, higher perspective going through your day. What do you learn about yourself? This is a way to strengthen many things in yourself, including mental picturing, memory, and empathy.